Welcome to Fictional Narrative. I'm Neri, and I am yet again reviewing a non-cozy mystery book. So today I'm reviewing Flux by Jinwoo Chong, and I am going to get a little bit of spoilery because I really couldn't find a way to talk about this book and be excited about it without getting a little spoilery. But also I do want to say that after I finished this book, I borrowed it from my library as an audiobook. I can probably see where if you're reading this as a regular print, then maybe it's not as engaging as it is as an audiobook. So I do recommend the audiobook version. I found the audiobook version to be very engaging. So this book follows three characters: Bo, Brandon, and Blue. Bo is 8 years old, Brandon is 28, and then Blue is 48 years old. And Bo is coping with the loss of his mother. Brandon is coping with the loss of his job and finding a new job and gaps in his memory because of this job. Brandon also takes up kind of most of the time in the storytelling. He tells us a story by speaking to a comfort character from an 80s TV show that he loved as a child, which I found very relatable. It's not, I would say, the most absolutely conventional way to tell a story, but it is definitely interesting and it makes sense throughout the course of the story. It is something that I really thoroughly enjoyed. Blue's story is also really interesting. Blue is helping to expose a former employer of his, where in the course of his employment, and it is a biotech startup. So before I get into Blue's story, though, I do want to talk more about Brandon's choice of vehicle for the narrative. I think it's obvious by the alliteration and the way that the synopsis is, because these characters are introduced in the synopsis as well. I guessed it, and I'm probably sure you can guess it too. This is one person in 3 different stages of his life. I was confused about this 80s comfort character that Brandon has, but as we follow Brandon's story specifically and what happens to him, it makes sense for him to want to have something comforting that is a focal point for him to tell the story. Not only that, but it is actually a great representation of how the world changes, because he talks about the show, how it was canceled, how, the actor had a son, how the son's life progressed and moved away from his father. It's a way that we get to see the world around our character changing as our character is changing, and as the main character is trying to reconcile the things that happened to him in the past. It is a lot, and I think maybe there were a few points where I thought, where are we really going with this weird narrative? But I don't think this book would be this book without it, because by the end of this book, you understand why Brandon needs to do that, and the payoff is so good. The storytelling in this book is absolutely amazing. As I have mentioned, it is sci-fi, so it is not hard science. It does involve time travel, but it is time travel in a very, very aesthetic sense of time travel, which is an interesting way to describe something. So obviously, as I've mentioned, there's a biotech startup that is involved in this, and the time travel would of course have to do with the biotech startup, and the biotech startup has a lot of parallels with Theranos, which are interesting things that I loved. But make no mistake, this is not a book that goes, I'm going to have parallels with Theranos, so you're going to feel sorry for Elizabeth Holmes or anything like that. I think it's just a good source of inspiration, and I think it was a cool nugget to have in the book. This story really does ask if you would change the past if you could, especially in Brandon's case. As Bo, his mother passes, and he constantly regrets this part of his life. He blames himself in a way, even though it's not his fault. As Brandon, his family life is in shambles, and he can't help but feel like it wouldn't be if his mom was still around. He's still hanging on to that. He's gotten a very mysterious offer for a job after losing a job that he's been working at. And it's not even a question of, does this new job even align with what I used to do? And it's crazy also because I've been to a couple MLM pitches. I have never actually participated in one because after the pitch, I'm like, okay, no, that's weird because you're not giving me the specific detail or anything. Any kind of business, you want to give specific details. And I sit through these pitches and I'm like, something's not right. The way that Brandon gets this job, the way that the pitching and the way that he's interviewed, everything echoes of how an MLM pitches your paradise life to you. Given Brandon's position in life, I understand why he feels like he would still want to take it, but oh my gosh, I think that it was such a great detail in the story to hook Brandon in. The way that the story tells there's kind of time skips because as we move along in Brandon's story particularly, he has holes in his memory and time is passing by, but he thinks that it's only been a small amount of time, but it's been months that he's been with this company. And when you find out why, it's like, what are you gonna do? The author incorporates this sense of urgency so well. And then to incorporate that back into, would you change the past? Since I'm telling you we're going from Bo to Brandon to Blue, obviously time continues to move forward for this character. His life moves on, but he is constantly haunted by his mother's death and how close he feels that he could have prevented it and the lengths he would go through. And at the end of it, after Brandon has lived his adult life to 48, and you sit there and you wonder, you really would go back to all of that? You do it again? What happens to this timeline, to you now, to everything that you've built? And for me, I realized that it was one of those moments that you know where your life went wrong, and maybe changing the past is the best chance you can give yourself. That's what I took from it. But it does bring up a good question of, would you give up everything else that you built? Because yes, Blue's life is in shambles. Yes, he can only speak through implants that are temporary because this company has basically hindered his ability to speak for the rest of his life. Yes, we see someone who wants to heal so much from even the present point in his life, and maybe he could do that. And so I feel like there's a masterstroke of storytelling there that puts me as the reader in this position where it's like, do I focus on the now or do I go back? And Blue, or Brandon, has to make this decision. But in order to make that decision, he has to find out what Flux, the company is called Flux, what Flux knows about what they did to him and what he can achieve on his own. I would say that the one disappointment that I felt throughout this book was, even in the synopsis, we were given this whole 3 people died because of this company. But it's not the way that I thought they would, and in a way that made it kind of really anticlimactic. I think for me, I feel like the author could have done something a lot bigger with those characters, but I think of that more of probably from a reader's point of view as someone who consumes mysteries a lot. I feel like there's a lot that could have been done, but I do understand that maybe in the book it just didn't allow for that kind of time or that explanation. I don't know that it would have so much taken away from the main plot. I think it would have added to it. But honestly, that's my only issue with this book. I also like that this book, Brandon is queer, but he's not, I don't believe he ever really labels anything, but he's attracted to men, he's attracted to women, he could be bi, he could be pan, he's queer. And it's not an unhealthy representation of that. So I did like that a lot. Anyway, I just really loved how it handled sci-fi aspects, although not being hard science, which it doesn't need to be, in a way that is definitely aesthetic. You can visualize this. And also character detail, mystery elements to it. These were all handled extremely well. So definitely this is the book that I would recommend to anyone who has the time for science fiction. I say have the time for science fiction because I feel like with science fiction, I need to pay attention to certain things that I may not absolutely have the attention span for. But I made it through this one, and honestly, I see myself revisiting this story again and again. I just really loved it. It is a 5 out of 5 for me. If you have the time, check it out. And again, I do definitely recommend the audiobook. That is the format that I experienced this in, and it was really good. So if you watched this far, thank you so much, and I will see you next time. Bye!